My name is Erwin Chemerinsky. I'm the Dean of the Law School. I think my role this afternoon is to apologize to you for the room being warm. As was pointed out before I came in, we're really good about having air conditioning in the winter and heat in the summer. But we do have fans, and hopefully the room won't be too intolerable. This is a wonderful occasion for the law school. This is the first annual, and I hope there'll be many, John and Mary Carrington lecture. I'd like to begin by introducing you to John and Mary Carrington, who are here in the front row. Very grateful for their generosity in providing for this lecture. Just a word about each of them. They've had tremendously distinguished careers. John has been the CEO of 5 different companies. He's now the CEO of a company called WebSense, which focuses on computer security. He's done a tremendous amount of volunteer and pro bono work, especially with the Young Presidents Organization. Mary Carrington has a very distinguished career as a lawyer. She's been general counsel of many companies. She has a real passion for women's issues, including serving on the Women's Leadership Board of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and she's been wonderful in donating her time to many organizations, including helping us here at UCI Law School. And I say it's thanks to their generosity we're here today, and we have the wonderful occasion to hear from Fred Fielding. I could spend all of our next hour telling you the accomplishments and honors that Fred Fielding has received. I'll just briefly introduce him to you because it's a much longer biography in the program. Fred Fielding went to Gettysburg College and then the University of Virginia Law School. And after that, he had a career in both public and private service of great distinction. In fact, when I think of somebody who could be a real role model for our students in terms of public service, it's Fred Fielding. He served as a Deputy White House Counsel during the Nixon administration. He was the White House Counsel for 5 years during the Reagan administration, and he was again the White House Counsel during the administration of George W. Bush. Between these stints at high-level government service, he served in private practice. During all of this time, he was often serving on government boards and commissions, and he's now a partner in the litigation group at Morgan Lewis. Please join me in welcoming Fred Fielding to the law school. Mr. Fielding, to mark the occasion of this being the first John and Mary Carrington lecture, we have a plaque for you that says, "Acknowledgement of the Honorable Fred Fielding delivering the inaugural Mary and John Carrington lecture." And it's for this date.
Well, thank you very much. I guess I don't need to speak. Thank you. That's very special, and I appreciate it. Is my mic on? Yeah. Okay. Wave if you can't hear me, please. But thank you for the very generous words. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor, and it really is a pleasure. And I must tell you, this is really an exciting place. I spent some time here after I landed until today, until now. And you're doing really exciting things. And so I guess at the outset, let me congratulate you, your dean, and my host for your outstanding stewardship of this institution. It's new, but I must tell you, it's been noticed by the profession, and you've been able to attract a faculty that would be the envy of many law schools. So congratulations to you. You know, I've been asked to speak today about public service and my experience in public service, and you know, the mysteries of Washington and political law and that sort of thing. But I must tell you, my experience has been a trustee of an educational institution, and from observation, if you really want to experience high drama of politics and you want to see the high dungeon of intrigue on many issues, try being a dean. So my congratulations to you, certainly, sir. Also, on my behalf and on yours, I'd like to thank the Carringtons very, very much. I think this is an honor to be delivering your inaugural address candidly, and I think that your devotion to this school bespeaks of just what I'm talking about, because obviously the Carringtons had many, many exposures to other educational institutions, and for you to pick this one is is outstanding for this one, and certainly bespeaks of the confidence that you have in them. So thank you very much. When I was approached by my longtime friend, Carolyn Beeson, to present this lecture, she suggested that I fashion the remarks that we're talking about and discuss my experiences in public life. And it was her thought that that would mean more to you and you'd enjoy it much more than my selection, because I had a clever title called Coping with the Dormant Commerce Clause. But she seemed to think that Plights and Pleasures of Public Service might be a little more interesting to you, so we'll proceed. And at the outset, I really must say, and I mean this sincerely, I've been very, very blessed in my professional career, in my professional life, and especially my personal journeys in public service. And I've had the honor and the privilege, as just was mentioned, and the opportunity to directly serve 3 presidents over a period of 40 years. Each was a very different leader, a very different era, facing very different challenges. And although I will concentrate my remarks today on those experiences and how they relate to public service, but I also must tell you I had a very unique opportunity a few years ago to be a commissioner on what is now known as the 9/11 Commission. And I must tell you that that was probably the most rewarding and challenging public service experience I've had. We had to deal for over a period of almost 2 years with the history and the origins of that tragic event, and to discover its causes and define and craft possible solutions for issues that none of us sought, but all of us have to live with now. So again, it's not just political appointees. There are other avenues of public service that are intriguing. People often refer to public service, candidly, as this great sacrifice. For lawyers, this is wonderful. You don't have to keep time records. You only have one client. And you don't have to send out bills every month. Now, it certainly makes your financial situation more interesting, though. I guess I should say that. But exactly what is the role of counsel to the president is what I'd like to discuss briefly with you. You should know that in Washington there are all sorts of positions with cryptic titles. There are more special counsels, special advisors, special prosecutors in that city than you would want to know, and by and large, you don't want them to know you either. But I must say that counsel to the president sounds a little less threatening. Nevertheless, people in Washington have often, as many years as they've been there, don't really understand what that office entails. Part of the reason for that is that it's an evolving office. I used to, when I first was in the Reagan administration, I described the job as an analogy to a legal air traffic controller. Then President Reagan fired all the traffic controllers. So I stopped that analogy. But in shorthand, the responsibilities are as broad and as consistent with the president's prerogatives and the president's authorities, because that's your job, is to help the president in fulfilling his constitutional obligations. And there's no statutory, unlike most federal positions, there's no statutory position that says counsel to the President of the United States. There are in every White House an allocation of assistants to the President. And so the press secretary is an assistant to the President. The chief of staff is an assistant to the President, and so forth. And then each of those, the way it's set up these days, has their own constituent offices underneath, but all pointing to the cabinet, if you will, for the president or his assistants, and you meet every day. The office of counsel to the president itself is relatively recent. The first one was in 1943, when Roosevelt decided he wanted one of his old friends from New York to come down and work with him and gives him some advice. and you didn't know what to call him, so they finally ended up calling this the Special Counsel. He was the first one. And over 70 years, it's varied in its title, its rank, and its importance, depending on the president and the president's wishes, because that's where you get your direction. And I think it's safe to say now that this office is now institutionalized. Since the Reagan administration, it kind of pulled together. There are certain responsibilities that now are, even though there's no title counsel of the president, there are statutes, laws, and regulations that say such and such shall be handled by the counsel of the president. So, but as I noted, it differs with each president. The personality of the president, the prior relationship that you may or may not have had with the president, and also the relationship that he has with the Attorney General. Because although counsel of the president is the counsel to the president, the Attorney General is the chief legal officer of the United States. And they should not mix. They should not mix. But for instance, President John Kennedy, obviously his brother was the Attorney General. I don't think there was many calls to the White House Counsel's office during that period of time. And Johnson had three. And they each thought they were counsel to the president. Each of them had the same title, but there were three of them. So, as I say, it varies. In my case, the three presidents that I was privileged to work with, each were very different in their style, very, very different in the problems we faced. President Nixon's was a very structured staff. He had some very, very extraordinarily able people. And what history will someday uncover is the breadth of plans that the president had for the second term for reorganizing the government into very much more functional systems and that sort of thing. Of course, he opened the door to China, which no one else could have done. But by the same token, they also had Watergate and the tragedy of that and the destruction that brought not only to the people involved, but also to the natural psyche and to people's really trust in their government, that their government couldn't do anything wrong. Because there, suddenly, you had Vietnam, and then suddenly you were faced also with Watergate. And so there was a shaken public confidence that really is, I'm not sure we're over it yet, but by the same token, the Nixon administration was, as I say, that way. Ronald Reagan, I was there from the beginning, and as you know, if you just heard that I went to the end of George W. Bush's administration. If you have a choice, start at the beginning. Don't pick it up at the end. But Reagan from the start, he's a great client. He organized his White House on policy, operations, and messaging, and it was very, very outstanding administration. It accomplished an awful lot. It had its ups and downs. It had an assassination attempt. It had all sorts of interesting economic fights. By the same token, up until the Iran-Contra, it was pretty much an scandal-free administration. I left 7 months before Iran-Contra and was accused of knowing it was coming, but I'm sorry I didn't. George W. Bush, I came in after he'd been in office for 6 years. We had just lost, the Republicans had just lost both houses of Congress, and the House had announced that it was going to close down the White House with oversight. Publicly announced it as a goal. And I think that's why they brought me in, because I had some experience and had dealt with both sides of the aisle as well. They had 9/11 during that administration. They had a war, and they also have a cyber war, which is tremendous and very, very invidious, and we're still fighting that. Anyway, he was a great client, extremely accessible. He was fun. He had a nickname for everybody. By the same token, unlike the rumors of President Reagan, he got in there really early. I used to get in at 6:30 in the morning because although he officially started at 7, he had this telephone by his desk in the Oval Office with a button that said Fred on it. And so if he pushed that button at 6:35 in the morning, you really wanted to be there, because that's what he did to start his day. And then he would start his formal day at 7 o'clock. So the size of the staff, just to fill it out for you, it depends again. Ronald Reagan, I think the most we ever had at one point when I was there was 8 lawyers. The Clinton era, when they had 2 counsel's offices during Clinton, one to handle the scandals and one to do the regular stuff. And the one that had the scandals had its own press secretary. So anyway, I'll leave that where it is. And again, the Bush administration, when I came in, I added a deputy, a formal deputy, because of the oversight load that we had. So we had to use a lot of manpower and woman power to deal with those as well. As far as the functions of the counsel's office, just to give you a feel for this, it's very broad, as I said, but there are some fixed responsibilities that are consistent with the presidential obligations and the preservation of executive branch prerogatives. To give you an example, everyone knows about executive privilege. That varies between administrations as to how it's important, and also it varies as to how much the president really is concerned about preserving executive branch prerogatives for his successors. Toward the end of the Clinton administration, to give you a hypothetical, he was permitting and directing, for instance, his counsel to the president to go up and testify before Congress, something that had never been done before. But again, then the next president tries to pull it back because of the equilibrium that every executive branch seeks and every congressional reign seeks as well, and it ebbs and flows back and forth. Another fixed area of responsibility are pardons. We all know about infamous pardons, but there are a lot of pardons that go on that are not so infamous. Ethics compliance is part of the president's prerogative and his responsibilities, because he's chief executive, he's a commander-in-chief, and he's head of his political party. And though the twain shall not meet, you have to make sure that they don't meet, and you have to make sure that ethically that there's a separation. Judicial selection is handled out of the counsel's office, and is a very important part of that of an administration if the president, the incumbent, cares about it. And I say that with caution because some of them don't have as much a priority about judicial selection as you would think. After all, this is your legacy. This does last beyond the 4 years or the 8 years, and yet some are willing to fight very hard for their nominees. Others are not willing to fight hard because it's a political trade-off. The other functions, now I'm wrapping up my list here. Clearance of all executive branch officials are done through the White House Counsel's office, where that means somebody who's going to be an assistant secretary for agriculture. You have to review their business, you have to review their finances, you have to review their FBI files, you have to have a nice conversation to see what the FBI may have missed. And because that could be a terrific embarrassment to the President of the United States if something comes up and he has a nominee that they're fighting for to get confirmed, and it turns out that the person has a serious problem of one of those natures. Why? Because it undermines public confidence in the President and his ability to think, his ability to make decisions. And also, if it becomes patent that he's made decisions purely on political basis, that becomes very apparent very rapidly as well, and again affects public opinion. The other responsibility that's fixed is the Counsel of the President is the arbiter of disputes between departments and agency general counsel. I mean, there has to be some place if transportation and defense are fighting over something, there has to be somebody that can sit them both down and talk to them. So that's the function as well. As I say, there are other constitutional issues. We had a big gun control issue in D.C. In the last 2 years of Bush 43. Another area which you may laugh about is gifts. Because you always have to worry about gifts. People always want to give the president gifts, want to give people on the staff gifts, or you go to a foreign trip and all of a sudden there's a set of cufflinks and it's from the Chinese, somebody or other, and they don't look very expensive, and they're usually not, but boy, they look expensive when they're on the front page of the Washington Post. So I mean, that's what you have to deal with. And as I mentioned before, the NSC operation is now an integral part of the menu for the White House Counsel, primarily because of areas like cyber war. And then there are first family issues. Sometimes I wish that presidents weren't allowed to have children or brothers, because there are an awful lot of problems that come up. But anyway, or that the first lady doesn't like to take gowns from designers and keep them in her closet. I mean, these are all the kind of problems that you deal with, and you say, okay, that's silly, but by the same token, somebody's got to do it, and it has to be done right, because again, you're protecting your client, the president, as president. Then there's the other category, other than fixed. And this is expect the unexpected, because you never know what's coming in when you walk in that day. And remember March 30th, I was sitting there talking about, it was an awful thing about, I think this is public, I hope it's public, about somebody wanted to appoint an entertainer whose last name was Sinatra to something. And I was sitting there talking to Deputy Attorney General about it, and all of a sudden we got the word that the president had been shot. And it just, your whole world just suddenly turns around. We had issues that day, and also late subsequently when the President Reagan had cancer and he had to have an operation. Do you exercise the 25th Amendment? It had never been exercised before. And so the president didn't necessarily want to be the first to exercise it for a simple operation. It wasn't a tooth pull, but it was a simple operation. By the same token, he didn't want to, but by the same token, he was going to be incapacitated, and we didn't know how long he was going to be. And so history will show the letter he signed basically says, I'm doing this, I'm turning this over to the vice president, but nobody else should feel that they have to later. I mean, the practical problems of dealing with somebody who cares about his office but also cares about precedents that he's going to set. In the last administration, of course, was the beginning of a lot of issues about Guantanamo, detainee issues, all of which you had to deal with. We had, in the last 2 years, we had the U.S. Attorney firings, discharges, whatever you want to call them, that it suddenly became a big deal up on the Hill as well. They couldn't find emails, so everybody said that the emails had been destroyed. Well, they hadn't been destroyed. They had just taken them from one system to another system, and nobody could find them when they changed systems. We finally did it because the taxpayers, I hate to think how much. But there again, that was one of the issues. You may all remember the PATCO strike from the air traffic controllers I made reference to earlier. That would come under the expect the unexpected category as well. Again, just remember, well, of course, there are discipline and dismissals. I mean, we've had the loss of deputy secretaries of defense and head of the GSA, and it sounds like that's coming around again. And the chief of enforcement, the SEC. I mean, you have to deal with these problems because people get in trouble, and people not only get in trouble in their personal life, but sometimes get in trouble in their performance of their duties. And then, at the end, of course, there's scandals. Anything that's got a gate on the end of it is a scandal in Washington now. Debate gate, travel gate, cylinder gate, I don't know what that one's called, solar gate, I guess. The problem with that, if you're counsel to the president, is you have to do the unthinkable in Washington. If there's a problem, you get your client away from it, but you have to get in the middle of it. But that's part of the job. You have to, because otherwise you won't understand what the problem really is, and you're delegating it to other people. And then there are special assignments. They're mostly in national security. That you get to attend economic summits and things like that, which are kind of very interesting, especially if you're a lawyer, because everybody says, what's a lawyer doing at an economic summit? Usually not much. But that's the brief summary of the job. It's the Wikipedia version, if you will. Now, in real life, what does the job mean? It means that you leave a meeting in the Situation Room concerning a pressing intelligence matter, and you return to your office and find that there's a question of, can the president accept the use of a mountain bike from a family friend for the weekend? I mean, it's just, or you're going from the Oval Office and you've been dealing with the legalities and the intricacies of setting up a TARP fund, and you go back to your office and find out that somebody, a presidential appointee's been arrested for shoplifting. And it just, what I'm saying is it runs the gamut. And you may recall during his Supreme Court hearings, John Roberts had to regale everybody with the explanation for why he wrote a memo to me when he was on my staff in the Reagan administration, in which he recommended that President Reagan not send a letter of praise to Michael Jackson for some charitable act that Jackson had done. But I mean, they just go on and on. Every rose and every flower in the United States has been named after a first lady, and then people try to exploit it. The human imagination is wonderful. But, and I think what I'd like you to remember, and I've always maintained this, is that the client in this case is the president, as president. And what does that mean in practice? That means you must be prepared to provide and advise him and his closest advisors, not only about the law, but about the institutional considerations as well as the legal considerations. And it also means that you have to give him advice, so it's only in the president's official capacity, not in his personal capacity. Sometimes that's hard because you know personally what the president may want to do, but if you're giving advice based on that, you're not doing your job. I guess what the position really boils down to is you have a constant legal crisis management job. I mean, that's really what it is when you boil it down. Now, during my service to the Reagan presidency, don't forget how cold the Cold War was during that period of time. It was still pretty tense. By the same token, an event took place that stood out in my mind, which I'd like to share with you, because it's the best illustration I could think of one can give the best legal advice in the world, but you have to understand the president's role and his constitutional role and his obligations are so awesome and call for the highest sense of conviction and courage in making those things. And you have to provide more than legal advice. I made reference to the PATCO strike twice now, but you know, he had a decision. He was going to, whether he should fire 11,500 people, the Air Traffic Controllers Union, if they went out on strike. They threatened to strike. And the president was outraged because not only they threatened to strike and close down the air system of the United States, but they had signed an oath that they would not strike. And that is what really bothered the president as much as anything else. So we marshaled all the legal forces of the government, the FAA and the Labor Department and the Commerce Department, the Transportation Department. We had outside counsel. Everybody's looking at this. We arranged for replacements to operate the whole airline system if they went on strike. And, of course, what happened was the ultimatum came and they said, we're going to strike. So he was preparing to sign something, and we had a conversation. And he said, now, I'm doing the right thing, aren't I? And I said, yeah, Mr. President, you're doing the right thing unless there's a crash in the first 48 hours. Because this was a young presidency. If there had been a crash in the first 48 hours, it wouldn't have mattered how sound the legal advice was. His judgment would have been called into question. It probably would have been a one-term presidency. So, that's courage. That's high stakes, and that's leadership. And that's what the president has to do, and so your job is to really support him as best you're able in that job. Now, you've been very indulgent with me as I've walked down my memory lane of public service, and I just would like to finish with a parting thought. Public service can be one of the most rewarding personally and professional experiences you can imagine. It gives you an opportunity to really make a difference. It's not just you won a big award. It's not that you drafted the perfect lease or that you wrote the perfect contract. You really can make a difference. And it provides the opportunity to give back to your nation, to your state, to your local community, something, and to use your talents and skills to do that. And so even today's climate, especially the national and the federal level, where public service can be devastating to somebody's career for some reason that somebody else has done. Somebody gets caught, you can get caught in a scandal due to the circumstances of the acts of others or due to your own hubris and your own carelessness. And we've all painfully witnessed television where you read the press, the reaction, the instant judgments that come out of an event are presented by the media, they're presented by partisan opponents, either side of the fence. Then it almost ensures that the real facts of what took place, good or ill, will really never get the same level of attention. So that's a real danger, and it's a danger, and it's a problem that is affecting the recruiting of good people to come into government. Because you can't turn a mistake into an axe murder. By the same token, that's what sometimes happens to people. But having even said that, I really, really want to urge everybody that I can to do public service. 1 cent, 2 cents. I mean, everybody laughs when I say, we really do need a revolving door. Everybody says, oh, it's horrible, it's horrible. No, a revolving door is necessary in our kind of democracy. We need to take people that are experienced in the public and private sector, apply those skills working with the support of career public service so that you really have citizen public servants. And it's really important because ultimately the vitality of the system of government that we have, which is unfortunately presently so flawed and deadlocked, it's the only way you're going to get that is to get people in there that are doing things, that are thinking ahead, that are doing it for the right motivations, not because they think they're going to get ahead. So I urge you to support anybody who wants to do public service. I urge you to support public servants. And I urge you to do public service if you have the opportunity. It's very important. I think we all must remember the cautions of Plato, and I will mess his quote up a little, but the message was that wise men who decline to serve their own government are condemned and doomed to be ruled by unwise men. And that's the problem. So, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I've enjoyed it very much. If you want to have Q&A, I'd be happy to try.
You're wonderful for some questions.
For a long time after Watergate, there was kind of a thing about a gossip where you were accused of being deep-throated until Bradley finally came out years later and said that you weren't.
Yeah, I think that story's playing pretty well, don't you?
How did you deal with that?
I dealt with it because, at one point, first of all, it was inconsistent with somebody being a lawyer. I mean, if you're entrusted with things you don't like, you leave. You don't violate your confidence. By the same token, the views of people in the country were very mixed. I had a dear friend of mine who sent me a telegram, of all things, and it said, knowing you as I do, I know you wouldn't be deep-throated. But if you are, I'm proud of you. But I mean, that was the kind of thing you had. But actually, I thought the strangest part of the deep throat business was this school in Illinois, I think it was a journalism school, where they spent, that was a course. They spent 3 years trying to figure out who Deep Throat was. This was the journalism course. Can you imagine spending your money for this? Anyway, they first decided after 2 years it was Patrick Buchanan. They made the announcement, Buchanan said, "You're crazy." And then they said, well, then they went back, and after the third year, it was me. And so when they made this great announcement at a huge fundraiser at the National Press Club, I should add, I didn't react. I didn't respond. And it drove that professor crazy because I wouldn't respond. Because that was the end of the story. And he knew it. He was a journalist. One day story, nothing, end of story. But it was an interesting thing. I used to watch when the young associates in the firm would kind of look at you and like, maybe he is. Yes, please.
In the Reagan era, did you protect Reagan from the dementia gate?
From the what?
Dementia gate?
No. There was no way to protect him from that. The only thing that was interesting about that was his response once he realized what his problem was.
He did.
He really did. He did it in a great way that was a good signal for other people facing it and other families facing it. And he did it with a lot of dignity. The question of whether it was in place the last 2 years, I think has been pretty much debunked by the people that were there. There were one or two people who were ooged out that then later said, they were worried about, but I've read a lot of interviews about it. I'm confident it wasn't then. Yes, please.
I have the unique opportunity, my law office, the office manager is Kathy O'Connor, married to John Taylor, yes. As everybody may know, she was White House Chief of Staff to Nixon when he left, and he was the executor of the Nixon estate. We've had many, many conversations, interesting, about the evolution of partisan politics over the years. Could you comment briefly on how partisan politics may, as we come closer to the Obama administration and past administrations, how it affects the office of the White House Counsel?
Well, it not only affects the office of the counsel, but it affects the whole operation of the White House. But in fact, for instance, the really impact that I saw was the attempts right before I went into the Bush 43 era, where, I mean, they just, can you imagine brazenly saying, we're going to close down the White House? I mean, if that isn't partisan politics, they didn't have a target yet. They were just going to close down the White House, just shut it down with their oversight. And so, I mean, that's terribly abusive. Look, I could stand here for a half hour and talk about the evolution that you're talking about, because it's something that I've studied and I've read about and I've thought about quite a bit. I think it started, as I mentioned earlier, I think it started during Vietnam and then Watergate. And the press was instantly finding they could be heroes if they wrote, didn't matter necessarily that it was true or not. Now, in the Watergate case, a lot of it was true, but by the same token, they were doing things the press had never done, looking into politicians. Okay, fair game if they want to do it. But in addition to that, you had another problem. You had a problem where Congress was really feeling its oats, Senate and House, both sides, but they started a proliferation of subcommittees. And at the same time that that was happening, you had a breakdown in political party discipline. So, what happens? You have the press, and they're eager, they're doing everything. You have a young congressman from wherever who decides he or she wants to get on television. It's easy to do it. You just say something outrageous, and everybody focuses in on you, and then you're off to the races. So what has happened is you've had this terrible breakdown of comity between the branches. There is very little comity at all. Matter of fact, there's very little comity between the House and the Senate. Regardless of who's in and who's out. And a lot of this with the White House has been, well, my own personal view has been exacerbated by Obama himself. But that's a personal observation. I don't mean to launch into a political thing, but I think that there was a squandering of opportunity of goodwill, and it was squandered at a chance where you might have been able to break this cycle of comity. So what do you have? You have mayhem up there, and nobody's talking to anybody. They deadlock, and it's like these stories you hear of Balkan villages where there's a murder in the streets, and it's because he's avenging his great-grandfather who was murdered at another place, 100 years ago. I mean, it just keeps going back and forth, and it's into a very bad cycle. I didn't mean to ramble about your question,
No,
but
we've had hours.
yeah, well, you can have hours about it. It's a very serious problem. Please.
Given that you've said that your job description has varied with each of your clients, did you ever feel more than other times that the description between your duties and the Attorney General blurred? Or was it always very separate and very well understood whose territory was whose?
I worked very hard for it to be that way. There were times when we had problems in the Bush 43 administration because there were serious problems within the department for periods of time there. But you just have to. You can't get in each other's way. I mean, I wouldn't think. But by the same token, there's a lot of things I haven't mentioned. One of the things is that I've always set up is that when I'm counsel to the President, I am the only person in the White House that can talk to the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General or the head of the criminal division about a criminal matter. No one else in the White House can. They'll be dismissed. You have to have that because otherwise people will abuse it, or it will be perceived to have been abused. If the head of the political operation calls up and asks about it, a pending indictment, forget it. I mean, does that answer your question?
I think so. I was also sort of curious, have there been occasions where you've had to sort of assert to the President, your client, or whomever it is that's asking you to do something that this really belongs with the Attorney General, or you see something with the Attorney General, within the Attorney General's office that you feel
both,
really...
Yeah, but both have happened. I see what you're saying. Yeah, both happen. But that's not trying to usurp. That's recognizing that there is a problem.
That's,
yeah,
okay.
that's right. You'd sit down with the Attorney General and just say, look, this is what I think, this is what you think.
But has that
Nobody
changed?
wants to say, let's go to the boss,
And
then I'm there so I can go to the boss.
Has it changed more with certain presidents than others? Is it a function of who's sort of
Well,
running
it's
the shop,
staffing different. I mean, the Nixon staffing was so different from the Reagan staffing was from that. So your situational differences exist.
Ask him who his favorite president is.
She wants me to ask you who your favorite president
Yeah, and it's like, who's your favorite child? Right.
You can tell us.
Yeah, you can tell us. We're private. Others, please. Dean, why don't you pick them out? I feel.
Mr. Fielding, going back to your early years, what led you, or what route did you take to become Associate Counsel to the Nixon White House?
Oh gosh, this is a shaggy dog story. I thank you for the question. Unfortunately, a lot of young lawyers say, "Okay, I want to do what you did. Now, how do you do that?" And there's no conventional way to do it. I was practicing law in Philadelphia, and there was a change in counsel's office in the Reagan administration, and the word went out to the D.C. law firms that they were looking for a young lawyer who could back up the young counsel of the president named John Dean. Dean was 32 years old. I was up in Philadelphia. I was 31. But in Washington, one of the law firms that they asked was Morgan, Lewis and Bacchius, and the head of the office didn't think there was anybody in their Washington office, but wanted to suggest this young litigator up in Philadelphia. So that's how it happened. I came down. I was asked to come down to interview, and with John Dean, he asked me some piercing questions like how many branches of government there are and things like that. But if you stop and think about it, I was perfect for John Dean because I had no political base. And he did, and that's the way he was used to operating that way, and of course I'm just a lawyer, so you can't pick it out. I always tell young people, just be as good as you can at whatever you're doing. Seek opportunities to help and get involved if you're interested. I've been involved in the only political involvement I had prior to that was working on the Pennsylvania Constitution, only because I thought it was interesting. Dean, you want to be a referee here? Okay.
You mentioned, you had commented on judicial appointments.
Yes, sir.
Do you think it's in the public interest for justices to serve life terms in that?
I do indeed.
You do?
I do indeed. I firmly do. And I think that they have to be above the fray. And the only way you have to be above the fray, if you look at state Supreme Courts where they up for re-election all the time, it's the same game. So I do really believe that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you might comment on how today, when law school is trying to find ways to justify their existence, how a law school might best train students and young lawyers to enter into the public service, and what you think the best way for young lawyers to engage in the public service is.
Well, this is kind of a back way of what he asked me, but if you're interested, engage yourself. I mean, get involved, even if it's a nonpartisan something. But sooner or later, if you really want to get into politics, and I'm talking about non-elective politics, where you want to do public service in and out, you're going to have to sooner or later pick a side. Just because the neutral person, admirable as it may be, is not going to get picked over somebody who is at least philosophically inclined the way the party who's appointing him is. But I mean, I just urge everybody to do it and start at the local level. But if you really want to be a congressman or a senator, when you ultimately, if that's your game and your goal, make sure that you don't start too low, because there may be a long ladder that you have to walk up and you may run out of gas. The other thing, I've known young people, and I used to admire them because they were very, very involved in politics when I was doing nothing except trying cases, and they had their life planned. And in each instance, each of them fell off because they missed a milestone, and therefore they couldn't react properly to it. And so I always urge people, don't set goals that are to the exclusion of everything else, because a lot of things can happen in life. Who knows? Yes. This is the money question.
No, but from your description of what you did, it sounds as though you're like the ultimate general counsel. I mean, your client is the president, and the United States, of course, is the ultimate winner or loser of what you're advising your client to do. So, having advised clients a lot, how did you convince the president to do what you thought should be done or what was legal, when all clients have their own ideas, and so you have to figure out these. I mean, that must have been the ultimate way.
Well, yeah, it was. It's like any general counsel. You have to get the client's confidence. And for instance, I didn't know Ronald Reagan at all when he picked me. I didn't know him at all. Whereas George W. Bush, I did know. Nixon, I didn't know at all. But it took a while for us to kind of, with Reagan, to kind of size each other up. I don't understand, but he has to trust your judgment. But the other thing that's neat about that is if you walk in and you're counsel to the president, and he knows there's an answer that can only come from the counsel to the president, he's kind of stuck with you until he fires you. But it's confidence is what it is, and it's relationships. It's building relationships, just like it would be in a corporation. Yeah.
We have a reception outside that I hope so much you join us at. And please join me in thanking Fred Fielding for a wonderful inaugural lecture in the John and Mary Carrington Lecture Series.